Let's talk for just a moment. I mentioned one more time that we've had these series of meetings during the week. The big message overall is to take back some messages that Washington probably isn't hearing, and certainly not in the regular media. So I just wanted to give you one more opportunity this afternoon to hear from the delegation that was here from the US, to engage with them, to ask them questions, to correct them on things if you don't agree with things that they've heard this week. It's a good chance to jump into the conversation. I'd like to welcome our moderator, Meurmishvili. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay, I did pretty good. I am batting 1,000 today. She is the anchor and correspondent for Voice of America, and very pleased to have you here. Thank you for coming. And then we're talking about Ukraine's military challenges and the US view on Ukraine's military challenges as a result of these meetings. Vice Admiral Mike LeFever is a former director of strategic planning at the National Counterterrorism Center. He has spent a great deal of time in Pakistan. He is now the CEO of Concentric. And Lieutenant General Frank Helmick, who's the former commanding general of the 18th Airborne Corps. He is now Senior Vice President of Mission Operations at a company called SOSI, right? SOSI. Yes. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you for this great conference. Thank you for having us here. And thank you for the great introduction. It's a pleasure to be moderating this panel. I feel like, despite the differences you may have in your respective military services, is what the jokes that you have all the time about each other, I feel like I had the best of both worlds. Admiral, General, thank you very much for sharing this panel with me. And without any further introduction or explanations of what we're doing here, let's start with the biggest question there is, and different panels addressed this in different ways. But having you, brilliant and very successful military officers from the US, how do you see where Ukraine stands now? Especially as we keep in mind all the meetings that you've had since Monday and what you're seeing coming in from the United States. Are we doing enough? Should we be doing something different? What are your thoughts, your assessments? And let's start from you.
Gee, thanks. Easy question. First of all, before we start and get the answer, I want to thank Suzanne and Brad for putting this thing on. I mean, a lot of work went into it, I know, so thank you very much for allowing us to do this. But your question is a good one. How do we see Ukraine right now? What else can we do, we, the allies of Ukraine, can do? Number one, I have been, this is my 4th time in Ukraine in the last 18 months, 15 months. And I have been overly impressed with the commitment, the resilience, the dedication of the Ukrainian military personnel that I've met. Just unbelievably tremendous. The meetings this week were incredible at the highest levels of the government, in the military side of the house. But what I saw here this time was officers, senior officers that were totally exhausted. They've been at war since, many of you said, 2014, now recently this. But what I also remember is that Ukraine is only one of 2 countries in the history of this nation that have stopped a Russian mechanized penetration. Finland and Ukraine. So we're in a very select group, a very select place, at a very select time. The urgency that I sense here is the urgency that needs to be sensed elsewhere. Because what I sense when I walk around and talk to some of the military people here, there is no tomorrow. It's all about today. And what Ukraine is doing is changing the way we fight. With their innovation, with their tactics, and their incredible resiliency. Even though, on the front lines, it is trench warfare. It's brutal. So we've got to do all we can to help them. Sir.
Now, I second everything that Frank said, double tap everything he's mentioned. This is my first time in Ukraine, so it's been a wonderful experience, an incredible opportunity to meet and get around and understand the dynamic that's going on, the challenges that are facing Ukraine and Ukraine armed forces. And like Frank said, it's amazing. I know, you know, I got asked earlier today, it's like, well, you know, do you agree, you know, the president talked about, you know, Ukraine doesn't have to, we shouldn't let them shoot into Russia. And I look at that, and having been some of the policy, is that I can understand it's a difficult policy decision, but you know, from the idea that, hey, we don't want to escalate, but it is absolutely a disservice, I think, to Ukraine that the U.S. puts restrictions on their targeting, on their systems that we're sharing, as well as the software that will enable them to carry out the campaign that they need to do in order to be effective. Because we all know that Russia doesn't have any restraints on them about what they can do, where they're lobbing attacks from. So how else can you know, because we don't have enough weapons in any arsenal anywhere to shoot all the arrows that are being shot, and you need to go after the archer. And so the idea that, you know, Ukraine, incredible resolve that I notice, incredible resiliency, and focused on the operation to be able to do that. But as Frank said, I mean, it's altering how we think about warfare in the United States. I mean, just the other day, we canceled a large demand replacement helicopter program because of the things we're watching here in Ukraine on unmanned systems and what we can do with it. We're experimenting at our National Training Center, and we're trying to do everything to learn from what we're seeing in the fight and not fighting last year's war, what have you.
And since you have the mic, I would like to, before we move on to the technological advancements and the challenges or opportunities, let's address the issue of maritime domain. And since you are a person who talks about it,
A Frank one.
what do you think, are we doing enough? And Ukrainians have done an incredible work in the Black Sea. A third of the Russian Black Sea fleet is crippled or destroyed. They have to move their ships out. They cannot restore the ones that they lost or are on the bottom of the sea, cannot replace them. But are we doing enough? And if you could address enough to help them, and if you could also address the mines issue, which is not only the Ukrainian issue, but it poses danger to Turkey, Bulgaria. There was an explosion in Georgia not too long ago, one of those mines. So what's your view on that? How is the Black Sea security should be taken? And then I will ask you a question about U.S.'s role.
Yeah, a great question, because it is amazing to watch, you know, basically a country without a navy that has decimated one of the powers, you know, 30% haven't caused out of Sevastopol, sink major capital ships, a vignette. When I was a brand new ensign sailing around the world, one of my missions in the Med and in the Middle East was to follow the Moskva and the Kyiv around. So I found it with great humor that now the Moskva is a fish center at the bottom of the Black Sea. That we were following around, and you know, and Ralph mentioned it this morning about how we gave Russia this credit of this amazing force. And we're watching it. I had the benefit to be on a Russian ship for a couple days during a Russian UK-US exchange, and to see the condition of the ships, the lack of damage control that we would have in our units. And it's no surprise that after hits from air as well as the unmanned surface vessels, very unique for minor investment, to be able to destroy and move a major fleet away from their home port is just fantastic. With that, you know, what can we do more? I think the idea that they've opened up the grain routes and iron ore that's now back to normal levels, huge. You heard it about it today, about the economic recovery of Ukraine and how important that is, the sea route and what they can be able to do. And so it's vitally important. What worries me, and we mentioned it earlier about the mines that are seeded. And we had that problem in the northern Gulf with Iraq threw all the floating mines out and had some major capital ships destroyed, damaged in the mines. And I think there's where an area, not only can we help with some of the targeting and some of the information that we're providing, but also in the ability to help them if this becomes an issue. If there's, I'm not putting it past the Russians to, since they're so embarrassed in the Black Sea, and because of the Montreux Convention, they can't replace them, which is great. But the idea is, how do we help the mine warfare to be able to ensure that that trade route remains open? So the Great Coalition Mine Warfare, we have major mine warfare events that occur in narrow waters, like in the Persian Gulf, that we can apply here to be able to help. I think the issue is whether or not we can get the ships or aircraft up to be able to support that, but at least share that tactics, techniques, and procedures that Frank and I so love, that provides us the opportunity to help Ukraine ensure that lines of safety are open, and those lines are open. We're doing that now in the Red Sea. We should be doing that up in the Black Sea.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. The U.S.'s sort of more global role, not in the region per se, but U.S. has been defending and protecting the freedom of navigation all over the world. We're doing it now in the Red Sea, as you said, Asia Pacific, many different regions of the world. But somehow in the Black Sea, U.S. is not as present, maybe because of Turkey and the Montreux Convention. So what's your view on that? Is there a way for the United States to actually be the policeman that it's always been in the international waters and ensure the safety of this route?
Yeah, great question. And there's one thing, actually two things I never wanted to be when I was growing up. One is a reporter, and the other is a politician. So that's why I was in the military. But in my mind, the answer to that question, we are trying to assist a regional power, Ukraine, fight a global power, Russia. Personal opinion, we are managing the war not to lose. We're not managing the war to win. If we were managing the war to win, we would be there. If we would be managing the war to win, you would have consistent, reliable assistance that you can count on. And right now, we're not doing that. So we've got to get to that. We've got to say we've got to win this war. I talk about the sense of urgency. We're at that point, I feel, we're at that point now where we have to do all we can do to stop Russia.
I think more people should listen to you. And actually do as you say.
I've got to talk to my kids.
Now, you've been here since Monday, and you've had, as Susan said, amazing meetings, very insightful as well. So since the focus of the panel is to talk about advantages and opportunities, or challenges and opportunities of the Ukrainian military, what sort of stood out as you were having these meetings? What are some of the advantages, if there are any, that Ukraine has? And what are some of the challenges? So I will ask you to talk about the advantages and challenges.
Yeah, the advantages were so evident, and it's so evident in the length of this 2-year conflict as it continues to go on from the invasion, let alone since 2014. But the amount of innovation that the Ukraine armed forces have been using is incredible. The drone technology, whether it's the surface or whether it's the maritime or whether it's not the air, the deep strike that they just conducted into Russia, all in throughout that, it was a game, a continued game of how do you manufacture it, how do you control it, how do you man the force, and then the idea that as they continue to learn and evolve, just like the Russians, it's kind of a, hey, we've tried this, then the Russians started jamming some of the transmitters. And immediately Ukraine went back to the drawing board, reset, redid different frequencies, different tactics to be able to address the target set and to be successful in what they did. And what you can see is this constant evolving, adaptable armed forces that is not sitting still or not getting complacent. They're always upping their game because the enemy will always change their game to reduce the chances, countermeasures, and then so it's the countermeasures to be able to be aggressive. And what we saw talking with many of the armed forces was just that sense of continually adjusting, continuing keeping them on edge to be able to hold the advantage.
And do you see that as a challenge, that they want to constantly develop and advance, but there's lack of funding, there's lack of, maybe in some cases, centralization of R&D or research and development in this field? Do you see that as a challenge, or are there any other challenges?
You know, I see, you know, there's plenty of challenges here. Plenty, right? 1 to 1,000. But there are two that stick out in my mind right now, and they're big challenges. Number one is the ability to mobilize, train, and equip a force, and to do it quickly. The challenge, right, one of the big challenges, the law that the president just signed, reduced the age of mobilization from 27 to 25, I believe that's what it was. That frees up 150,000 new personnel to be mobilized into the armed forces. How are they going to do that? When are they going to do that? Where are they going to get the equipment to equip this outfit? And how are they going to deploy them to the front lines and be utilized properly? And how do you do that in a short order? That's one. Number two, an incredible, and I'm only talking ground, I can't talk, Mike's talking the sea piece, but an incredible logistics challenge that the Ukrainians are facing out in the field. Just remember all the different countries that have gifted different types of equipment to the Ukrainians. You've got 15 different types of trucks doing one thing. 5 different types of tanks doing one thing. 20 different types of artillery pieces doing one thing. How do you maintain that? Where do you fix that? Where do you get the repair parts for that? And how do you fight those systems? As a commander, we had a chance to meet with General Searcy. And I asked him a question. I said, sir, when you go to the front lines, and he's out there a lot, you guys know he's the leader that leads from the front. I said, what do you talk to your troops about? He says he listens, and they talk to him about manpower. They need men and women to fill the ranks. So that is going to be an incredible challenge, I believe, for the leadership of the Ukrainian military in the next 6 months, to be able to mobilize a force and make sure that they're trained enough to protect and defend their country and save as many Ukrainian lives as possible.
So we're talking about that will take 6 months, right? It's not going to be overnight. It will take some months, some weeks. We don't know what's going to happen with the U.S. aid and what's going to happen to the pipeline that was very robust up until now and has stopped for a few months now. So there are many unknowns, even though I should not sound as pessimistic. Speaker Johnson said that he is willing to put it to the vote and hopefully pass it. So assuming that that's coming, but still there is a time requirement here. And throughout the meetings in Kyiv here and elsewhere, we also very often hear that Russians have been adapting to, and you mentioned it as well, that they are learning. They've initially they had a major disaster thankfully around Kyiv, and they had to retreat back to the east. But it seems like they're coming back. Ukraine is running out of time. So how do you think, as a military officer, how do you think about that challenge when you don't have arms and time and your opponent or your adversary is getting stronger each day? how do you address that? I know it's an impossible question to answer at this point, probably, but you must have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think an incredible challenge from the leadership perspective, because it's the morale of the troops, the idea that they've been out there fighting for so long. So, you know, what Frank's talked about is kind of that training pipeline, that ability to rotate forces, to give them a chance to breathe, to give them a chance just to recoup and regenerate, feel part to be able to get back into the fight. The idea, because of the delayed in the aid, is, you know, as General Petraeus mentioned today, you know, I think it's going to be successful, but it is going to take time to re-push into the pipeline, get that pig moving through the snake again. And there's going to be some things that are going quickly, but there's going to be other things. And so in that meantime, how do they set up for success? How do they set up on almost a defensive position that allows them to continue to be able to then move the step forward and then be able to reset? But I think reset, the idea of keeping the morale up in the front lines. You know, you sense that air because of this delay in resources. You see the positive aspect of NATO and some of the coalition partners kind of answering the call, and in some ways, you know, even providing more than the U.S. aid in some areas. And so it's hopefully that portion of those partners to be able to sustain that as the rest of the supply picks up. And then we put in place a universal thing that the supply is never in, that it's a continuous thing, to be able to support that the troops know that they're going to have supplies to be able to conduct the missions that they need to do. Tough leadership challenge.
Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, the thing I think that's so incredible about Ukraine is their ability to adapt, to innovate quickly. And as we all know, the Russians counter that, but then the Ukrainians counter that. And it's going to be who adapts the quickest, who adapts the next, who can out-adapt each other, basically, I think, on the battlefield. That's one. Number two, we just need Ukraine to be better than Russia. That's it. We don't need to have them better than NATO or better than the rest of the world or whatever. We just need them to be better than Russia. That's what we have to help with.
We have about 7 minutes left before the session's over. If any of you have any questions, please get my attention. But I do have one more question to give you an opportunity to think about that. So, who has the, it's a difficult question to answer, I'm sorry, but who has the advantage at this point from the technological, air, drones technology on the ground, and is that reversible? If that's not an impossible question to answer again. And once you answer that, I have another.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a balance there, but as we all know, not necessarily. And so I look at Russia having somewhat unlimited resources, the depth, and then we're hearing about the amount of, you know, million rounds, was it million rounds from North Korea, you know, Iran, you know, kind of the axis, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so we're seeing these unusual alliances. So from a resource perspective, I would give Russia the uptick in the idea that they have kind of somewhat unlimited supplies of ammunition. As we see, they have zero regard for life and matters. You watched what the decimation that the incredible Ukrainian forces imposed on them out to the east. And it wasn't, they could care less. They, you know, kind of keep throwing bodies at the problem. So in one way, I would say Russia has the advantage. But in the way that wins wars, it's Ukraine. The Ukraine sense of resolve, the Ukraine sense of mission. They're fighting for the freedom of their country, and that advantage that's immeasurable when you put forces together to be able to do that. Their rapid innovation, their drive, their the ability that this is what we need to do to survive and be the country that we want to be and the freedom we're enjoying.
I think right now it's clear that Ukraine is on the defense. Hopefully, and I think they are building those defensive positions up to give them time and space to be able to get more forces, more equipment in. I believe, again, I don't know because I'm not a policy genius, but I believe that the assistance is going to come. I believe that there will be a renewed sense of urgency to accelerate that. I think there would probably be. I know if I was in charge of something, I would push everything as far forward as I can now, rather than wait for the green light to happen and then call the stuff forward. So I think that's what you'll see. So the advantage right now, I think based on what the Admiral said, Mike said about the numbers, sheer numbers go to the Soviets. But the advantage of adaptability, resilience, the entire country is behind this effort because they know if they're not, they won't have a country, is Ukraine. We just have to get others in the world to think that way.
Yeah, one of the generals, Ben Hodges, often says that war is a test of will and logistics.
Yeah.
So logistics is coming and the will is here. So
we can do much better on logistics from our side.
Any questions? If I don't see anybody, I will continue with mine. Okay.
Thank you very much. This question for both of you, really looking at the Admiral. It just strikes me that so much of U.S. assistance to Ukraine has been one-dimensional. That we're thinking about the ground campaign, and we're giving them stuff for the army. And there's two aspects. One of them, why are we not thinking more and doing more in naval domain? They're already doing a lot themselves. Why are we not helping more there? Why do we have all these aircraft sitting in the desert in Arizona and here in Ukraine? We could call them excess defense articles and move them right away. They're already decommissioned. So why are we so one-dimensional? And then related to that is one of the great things the United States does when we are in operations with our allies is we're the force enabler for everybody else. Aren't there things we can be doing to help enable Ukrainian forces that we're not doing?
Great question, and it's funny. Frank and I were talking about this earlier to break. I can't agree with you more. I don't know why this reluctance, this idea, you know, we almost like stalled, like, okay, we're going to give them ATACMS. And, oh, well then, you know, Putin said something about nuclear tactical nukes. You know, we're falling into their line of campaign. We're the greatest nation on earth. We should be able, just like Frank said, let's turn it on. We should have logistics bases inside Ukraine now. We should have forces that help and support the decision-making, the planning, and the execution, and the employment of the different resources, like you said, the enablers that are out there to be able to help them prepare and to be able to set a campaign in motion that ensures their success and victory. I couldn't agree, but I think you're spot on. There is logistics, there's hardware. I don't know what the reluctance was initially on the policy side that we finally got drugged there. You know, there's almost a sense that, you know, we've seen this unfortunate story in the past where we've been reluctant and then we find ourselves, holy shit, we're behind the curve. We needed to be out in front on this. This is now an existential threat to, like, another country invading. You know, we need to be out in front and demonstrate in the world that this is U.S. resolve, not only for ourselves, but this is a strategic point within history. Are we going to stand by and let it go? And are we going to be on the right side, deciding to be able to move those enablers and help and experience to augment what the incredible Ukrainian forces are doing to ensure success?
Yeah, look, I agree with what the Admiral's saying here. the thing that really I'm sure the Ukraine people are confused about, I would be, is that our audio, what we're saying, does not match what we're doing. And so we have to walk our talk as America, because we will either pay now or pay later. So, in my mind, let's put the chips on the table, let's help as much as we can, and let's try to make sure that Ukraine remains free.
And I think one of the key things that came up earlier is the misinformation and disinformation. We have to be able, we have not done well in telling the story, that there is reluctance from the sense of our Congress that what are we doing this for, and not realizing and putting in perspective of the outcomes, what the outcome of this would look like for now and for the future. It's just, you know, we failed in our strategic communications drastically in this way.
And the Russians are getting ahead of that globally as well, not only in the US. If there are no more questions, I have one final one for you, which is, you mentioned that, I believe it was you, Admiral, we should be learning from the Ukrainians. What is it that we should be learning from the Ukrainians?
Like I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's the idea of the rapid innovation, the understanding of asymmetrical advantages. You know, we sometimes tend to be in the, you know, big capital, you know, we're going to have aircraft carriers and we're going to have, you know, long-range bombers. And then you realize, and we're seeing it in some of the counterterrorism fight now in Syria and others, for limited resources, to be able to innovate and use products and other services, drones you buy off the shelf that now become manned cruise missiles. You know, it's kind of, you know, here we are spending $1 million a round to shoot down a $200,000, you know, $20,000 drone. You know, you kind of go, okay, well, that's the wrong end of the scale. How do we do that? How do we innovate? How do we now adapt to be able to counter this asymmetrical threat in a way that we can be successful?
General, do you see any movement in that direction, that the U.S. is seeing what's happening on the ground and is willing and able to sort of adapt some of those equations?
Absolutely. You know, let's just take the drone piece for a second. And what Ukraine is doing with the drones. Look, in my mind, Ukraine is the leader of the world in drone warfare. There's second place is not even close. So we have to learn from that. We in the United States have to learn from that. And the other thing I think is, it's kind of a wild, crazy idea that I have. I think the American people can learn something from the Ukrainian people. When you know a businessman that I know in Ukraine, and he runs a business to produce chairs and desks and all that other stuff, pens and tablets, and he has transformed his business to build drones for the military. That is a lesson that we, the American people, need to learn. That if you're at war, everybody's at war. Not just the guys and girls wearing the uniform.
I think I propose to applaud this outstanding